The night Sharon Whitmore slid her silver Lexus sideways into the drainage ditch on Pinehurst Drive, I watched it happen from my kitchen window with a mug of coffee in my hand, and I swear to you, for one split second, the universe itself looked me dead in the eye and said, "You see, physics does not care about HOA bylaws." 3 months earlier, that same woman had fined me $500 for using tire chains on my truck because she said they might scuff the asphalt. Yeah, the asphalt she cared about more than the people driving on it. My name is Gabrielle Xavier, and I've lived in Mountain View Estates up in Boulder County since 2019. I'm a meteorologist with the National Weather Service in Denver. So, winter storms are not some abstract seasonal vibe to me. They're my job, my schedule, my 3 a.m. phone calls, my sorry, I can't miss work because the whole Front Range is freezing over reality. When I bought my place, the neighborhood looked like a postcard. Clean homes, gorgeous, Flatirons views, quiet streets, reasonable people. Then Sharon became HOA president, and suddenly living here felt less like a community and more like being trapped in a beige-colored dictatorship with landscaping guidelines. Sharon was one of those people who treated a clipboard like a weapon. Blonde highlights, always fresh Lexus, always polished smile, always tight, like she was permanently posing for an ad about elevated standards. First thing she did as HOA president was rewrite the bylaws. They went from a normal little packet to an 87-page monster, single-spaced, covering everything from mailbox style to the exact shade of white allowed on window trim. I'm not exaggerating when I say she acted like she was protecting civilization itself from the collapse brought on by the wrong paint color. Then winter hit. Last December, we got our first real storm, the kind that dumps hard fast and turns our steep neighborhood roads into a skating rink. I drive a Ford F-250, and I put tire chains on because I had to get to the weather station. Pinehurst Drive has a nasty grade, and when those roads aren't plowed yet, you either have traction or you become a sled. I made it to work, worked a full shift, tracking the storm, got home safe. And 2 days later, Sharon hand-delivered a notice saying tire chains were now banned because they caused undue wear to community infrastructure. $500 fine for a first offense, double after that. I stared at that letter thinking this can't be real. I'd used chains for years. The marks they leave are minor, cosmetic, temporary. You know what isn't temporary? Sliding into a ditch, sliding into a parked car, sliding backward down a hill because somebody in a Lexus thinks aesthetics outrank traction. So I went to the next HOA meeting ready. I brought data maps, photos, snowfall history, accident stats, the whole thing. If Sharon wanted to play policy fine, I was going to show up with facts. The clubhouse was packed that night, more than usual. Sharon sat up front with Richard Caldwell, the vice president, nice enough guy. But back then, he mostly nodded when Sharon talked, and Margaret Flynn, the secretary, who took notes like she was documenting a hostage situation. When resident comments opened, I got up with my laptop. Sharon looked at me like I'd spilled motor oil on her Persian rug. "Yes, Gabriel," she said, and yes, she called me Gabriel like she was doing me a favor by almost getting it right. I walked through the numbers, explained the grades on Pinarest and Oakmont, showed photos of the chain marks, and said plainly, "These marks are cosmetic, but banning safety equipment on steep, icy roads is dangerous." People nodded. Frank Morrison, my neighbor down the street, backed me up and told the room he'd gotten stuck in a storm. Linda Patterson, who'd lived there forever later, told me she'd slid backward on Oakmont even with winter tires. The concern was real, and people knew it. Sharon didn't budge. She stood up, scraped her chair back like she was in a courtroom drama, and said the board had made an informed decision to protect a $1.2 million road investment. I told her protecting property values doesn't help much if residents can't safely get home. She cut me off. Rule stands. Pay the fines if you violate it. Next topic. That was Sharon in a nutshell. If reality disagreed with her, reality needed better manners. A few weeks later, February gave us a serious storm. NWS issued a warning. Snow piled up fast. And by the time I drove home after an overnight shift, our private neighborhood road still hadn't been plowed. I stopped at the entrance, put chains on, crawled up Pinehurst, safely got home and took them off in the garage. Next morning, Sharon was on my porch before my coffee got cold engine running in her driveway, face red from anger and cold. She told me neighbors had reported hearing and seeing my chains, which, by the way, is a weird sentence to hear before noon. She handed me another $500 fine notice. I warned her again about that drainage ditch halfway up the hill where the curve and the grade make it especially dangerous. I told her if somebody lost traction there, they could go off the shoulder and get hurt. She waved it off and said the road was perfectly safe when driven appropriately. I said, right when people have adequate traction. She walked away like I'd said nothing. I paid the fine under protest because I'm not reckless, and then I called an attorney. Patricia Reynolds, HOA law specialist in Denver. Sharp, calm, no nonsense. She reviewed the bylaws and told me what I suspected. HOAs have broad power, but rules have to be reasonable. A blanket ban on legal safety equipment, especially in a steep foothills community that could be challenged. She laid out my options, and the one that stuck was this: get signatures from 20% of homeowners and force a special meeting to vote on removing the rule. So I went door to door. And let me tell you, if you ever want to know what people really think about an HOA president, ask them while standing on their porch holding a petition. Folks were ready to talk. Excessive fines, arbitrary enforcement, Christmas lights fined on December 26th, a basketball hoop 6 inches too close to the curb costing a family hundreds, barking dog notices, mailbox notices, fence notices. Everything felt like surveillance. Frank signed immediately and helped me canvass. Linda signed and recruited half her friend group. We needed 30 signatures. We got 43 in 10 days. Sharon tried to block the meeting anyway, claimed signatures had to be notarized, totally made up, not in the bylaws. Patricia sent a formal letter, and suddenly Sharon remembered how rules work. Special meeting got scheduled for March 23rd. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. A week before the meeting, Richard Caldwell, Sharon's yes-man vice president, the guy I figured would back her till the wheels fell off, called me off the record. He warned me Sharon was bringing in an attorney to argue the HOA could be liable if it allowed tire chains. He sounded nervous, almost embarrassed. I asked why he was telling me. He went quiet, then said, "Because I'm tired of her extremism." That was the moment I realized this thing was bigger than chains. People inside the board were cracking. The meeting was chaos in the best possible way. Packed room, maybe 100 residents, tension you could feel in your teeth. Sharon brought a lawyer in a fancy suit who tried to scare everyone with liability talk. I stood up and said we weren't asking the HOA to endorse chains, just remove a prohibition on legal safety equipment. Frank raised the point nobody wanted to say out loud. What about HOA liability for unsafe roads if people are denied traction? Linda called out that plows can take 12 to 24 hours to show up after a storm. Sharon pounded the gavel like she was trying to nail the room to the floor. Then the vote came. Hands went up all over that clubhouse. Not even close. The tire chain ban was dead. You'd think that would have been the ending. It wasn't. It was just the end of Act 1. Sharon retaliated. Fence too tall. Mailbox needs repainting. Truck parked on the street overnight while I loaded gear. Fine, fine, fine. It was so obvious it almost would have been funny if it wasn't so petty. Patricia called it what it was: harassment. I held off on filing immediately because I still hoped the board could correct itself. That's when I met Richard at a coffee shop in Boulder. He admitted Sharon was going after everyone now, not just me. I asked when the next HOA election was. June. 2 seats up, including Sharon's. By the time I walked out of that coffee shop, I wasn't just fighting a bad rule anymore, I was running for the board. Frank ran too. The campaign basically turned into a referendum on Sharon's style. I focused on transparency, reasonable enforcement, communication. Frank focused on maintenance and infrastructure. Sharon ran on standards and property values and painted me as some anti-rule anarchist who wanted the neighborhood to become a junkyard, which would have been hilarious if she hadn't been sending legal-looking notices over mailbox paint. Turnout was huge, over 60%. I beat Sharon 93 to 51. Frank beat Margaret too. I'll never forget Sharon's face when the votes were read. She just went pale, stood up, grabbed her stuff, and walked out without a word. No speech, no dramatic exit line, nothing. Just heels on clubhouse floor and a door closing behind her. Karma doesn't always clap. Sometimes it just counts ballots. Frank, Richard, and I got to work immediately. We rolled back the worst policies, created appeals procedures, tightened enforcement standards, made things normal. Boring even. Which is exactly what HOA governance should be. Boring is beautiful when you've lived through nonsense. Then November came and so did the storm. Heavy snow, bad roads, plows late again. I chained up at the bottom of Pine Rest. Helped a newer resident in a stuck Honda get turned around, got home, took my chains off, started dinner. Later that night I heard an engine whining hard and looked out my kitchen window. There she was, Sharon, trying to climb the steepest section in that rear-wheel drive Lexus with no chains and lousy snow traction. I knew the exact spot she was headed toward. The ditch I'd warned her about. The same one she'd dismissed. She lost momentum, hit the gas. Wrong move, tires spun, rear end kicked out car, turned sideways, slid off the shoulder, and dropped into the drainage ditch nose first at an angle. Headlights pointed up into the snowfall like two little search beams looking for common sense. I ran outside. Frank ran out too. Sharon was trapped, shaken, crying, driver's door jammed. We got her out through the passenger side, half carried her up through knee-deep snow because she was wearing low heels, of course she was. And Linda Patterson came out with a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders like some grandma angel of the foothills. Frank called a tow. We stood in the cold while the tow truck driver winched that Lexus out and looked at the damage and muttered rear-wheel drive sedan on an icy hill. What was she thinking? Sharon looked at me, eyes red, and said the words I never expected to hear. You were right. About the ditch, about the chains, about all of it. I didn't gloat. I wanted to assure I'm human, but standing there watching somebody shiver in a blanket beside a wrecked car, you realize humiliation is already doing the work. She apologized later properly over coffee. Said she'd been so focused on standards and appearance, she stopped seeing neighbors as people and started seeing them as problems. Said she'd made things less safe, not more. And for a while I thought maybe that was the whole lesson. Then came the second twist. A sheriff's deputy called me in January. Financial irregularities, possible embezzlement, before my time on the board. Frank Richard and I dug into the records and found monthly payments $2,000 at a time to a company called Mountain States Consulting. No contract, no invoices, no real work. Frank searched state records. No company, it was a shell. Sharon had created it and paid herself through it. Over $36,000 stolen from the HOA? That part honestly shocked me more than the ditch, more than the fines, more than any of it. Controlling. Yes. Stubborn. Absolutely. Petty world class. But stealing from the whole neighborhood while pretending to defend community standards, that was a different level. The sheriff's office built the case. Sharon was arrested, charged, and eventually pleaded guilty to theft. She got 18 months in county jail probation and full restitution. Frank Richard and I sat in court when the judge sentenced her. Sharon looked worn down, smaller somehow, and when our eyes met, I saw remorse, real remorse, I think. Didn't erase what she did. Didn't refund the money by magic. But it mattered. And here's the part. People don't always expect me to say, the biggest thing I learned from all this wasn't just karma. Is real, though. Believe me. Watching her slide into that ditch after months of warning people against chains felt like the universe writing satire. The real lesson was, this bad leadership usually doesn't start with big crimes. It starts with small, unchecked arrogance, a stupid rule, a petty fine, a refusal to listen, a belief that control equals competence. If nobody pushes back, that mindset grows teeth. That's why speaking up matters even when the issue looks small. Sometimes this rule makes no sense, is the first crack in a wall hiding something much worse. These days, Mountain View Estates is normal. We have better financial controls, independent audits, shared signatures on major expenses, clear appeals, and a board that actually remembers we serve residents, not the other way around. When snow comes, people use chains if they need them. You can still see faint marks on the asphalt sometimes after a storm. Little scratches Sharon once treated like a moral crisis. They fade fast. Nobody cares. Because everybody remembers what happens when you prioritize pretty roads over safe roads. I still keep my tire chains hanging in the garage ready for the next storm. Metal rubber and a long story attached to them. Every winter, when I throw them on, I think about that night. The headlights in the ditch, snow blowing sideways, neighbors helping the very person who'd spent months making life harder for them. That, more than anything, is what stayed with me. Accountability matters absolutely. So does mercy. You can hold people responsible and still pull them out of the ditch. So here's the question I want to leave you with. When someone in power starts making small, unreasonable rules, where do you think the line is between being patient and waiting too long to push back? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a boss, a local board, or anybody drunk on a little bit of authority, tell me what happened. Did common sense win, or did karma have to step in first?